page 91, the silence era. Does anybody know why they call it that?
Because the Lord didn't speak to them.
I did.
Through the prophet.
Didn't use any prophets or nothing. And it was a 400-year period. That's what's really something else to me. That was like that long, to see that. Let me get some light here. But I did bring some extra material on the rebellion during that time, the Maccabean revolt. Is anybody familiar with the Maccabeans? Is anybody familiar with the Hanukkah? Around Christmas time, the 8 days. That has some relation with this, the Maccabean revolt. And I heard it a couple different ways. It was part of their rebellion, and it was something with the oil or something like that, but it didn't go into detail on some of the stuff I got today. But they had actually went to worship, and they regained the temple. That was part of the revolt, and when they did, they went in and did sacrifices for 8 days, and that was where they celebrate the Hanukkah. And I was like, well, I never heard that. I heard about the oil and not being used up during the 8 days, but I've never really dug in real deep on that. But tonight we'll take a quick look at the Maccabees, which they're Jewish people, and they were with the Zealots, and they went against the Romans, and they went against the people of that time, and it was in between when Persia had it, and then some other people took over after Persia, Greece, which was Alexander the Great. And I was like, man, that's just a lot of history during that time. Even though it was a silence area, it was a big area for the world. Alexander the Great ruled the entire world just for a short time period. Was it something funny? Did I say something funny? What?
Area.
The area instead of era?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, page 91 opens us up. He likes to give us a little side story here on the opening parts of the chapter. I'm going to try to bend this a little bit. It's wanting to fold up on me. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the gist of it is there was a lion, and he wanted to make sure everybody knew that he was king of the jungle. And so what he did, he went around confronting people, or the animals, and he bypassed all the little ones, and he went straight for the bear, and he says, hey, do you believe that I'm the king of the jungle? And he said, and the bear was like, yeah, most definitely. Lets out a big roar, and he goes to the tiger, and the tiger says, oh yeah, you the greatest. And he actually says that he responded, everyone knows that you're a mighty lion. And the lion swelled with pride. Then, of course, it's always the third one, right? That's the punchline, right? So he goes to the elephant, and he asks the elephant, this, and the elephant, and I believe it's in this third paragraph. He doesn't really say anything, but the elephant grabbed the lion and with his trunk whirled him around 5 or 6 times, slammed him against a tree, pounded him on the ground, sat on him, dipped him in a lake, dumped him out on the shore. Still didn't say anything, but in action he did this. The lion, battered and bruised, struggled to his feet, peered at the elephant through his good eye, and said, look, just because you don't know the answer, there's no reason to get mean about it. Right? But the elephant was just like, no, you're not going to. He took care. He showed him, but didn't have to say nothing. And and he tells us this little funny story, or somewhat of a funny story, to say that the religious leaders of the silence era were kind of like this. They wanted to go around, and they wanted the prestige, they wanted the authority, but yet they really weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. And really God has all the power and authority. But they pretended to have power, became self-absorbed. Legalistic is another big word what they would use. A couple other things he notes right there before we get into it. But 400 years, and you really don't hear a lot about it. It's kind of like you go from the Old Testament, and then you jump into Matthew and the Gospels, and it's like then you see this religious group, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. and a lot of times we kind of get them mixed up anyway. And so we'll look at that first, to kind of just real simply put it, the basics for them, and we'll take a look at that. Now on page 92, I don't have my chart with me to tell you all these things, but this is our review chart. Y'all have all that ready?
Oh, yeah.
So since I don't have my review written down for me, we'll go to the next part, okay? The storyline summary, we'll focus on tonight. It says the silence era, not error, but era. Pharisees, the storyline or the summary, Pharisees and others entomb the Israelites. And so I don't know why they chose the word entomb. On page 93, section 2, Roman numeral 2.
Oh, I see now.
Storyline summary. It says Pharisees and others entomb the Israelites in legalism for the next 400 years. And I'm like, they were really, obviously they were hunting for a word that was real strong to capture total control over the people, but entomb, I think that was a little far. That kind of, you're thinking about death, you're thinking about you can't move at all. And maybe that was close to that because if you didn't do what you were supposed to do, you get kicked out of the synagogue, you get blackballed, and maybe lose your job and all that. So a lot of that, maybe that is a decent word, but it just kind of didn't look right to me when I first saw it. They entombed the Israelites. They might have put them in bondage, in a religious style bondage, like an occult would do. In some ways, they were like, hey, you got to follow these certain set of rules, or you're out. But yet they didn't follow it. Okay. To what they were wanting them to do. Then you go into portion 3, the expansion, and this is interesting here because we see it says the changing guard. That's where I was talking about the different countries. It's a real, even though it's 400 years, there's a couple changes here, and the changing of the guard. Let's look at that for a second. And number 1 there, it's that last paragraph, or that next to the last. Jerusalem was, at this point, at the beginning, it was ruled by Persia in 333 BC. Alexander Great defeats the Persians in 333. All right, and see, if I remember correctly, he was about 33 years old when he died, but he ruled the world. And then, not too long after that, even though the Greek culture was established around the world, it breaks up into 4 parts after he dies. As soon as he dies, man, things start changing. And he establishes the Greek culture, Greek language. He dies, the kingdom's quartered, the Greek culture still is advanced and remains dominant. And we see the Greek and the Greek language, the culture. But Rome conquers the part of the world. The Roman influence is introduced, but for now the Greek influence is still strong. And so this is what you see. You see Persia to Greece to Rome, just like not real quick, but that's the march or the changing of the guard. Okay. So remember last lesson, it went from the Assyrians, and then you got to you had the Babylonians, and you had Syrians, and now you got Persia kind of mixed in there. Now it's Greece, it's kind of for the short period, and Rome. But all this had to take place before Jesus could come in, right? And we see that some of the prophecies, we'll see some of that. But here, it's just kind of neat to see it, that this is where a big portion of the changes take place during the silence era. All right, then the second thing is the political sects, S-E-C-T-S, or it's kind of a shortened word for a group with political power or religious power. And we see the Maccabees and the Zealots. Now, I don't know a whole lot about them. I know I've heard different things. Really hadn't dove in real deep on that. It's interesting, so I did dig a little bit today looking for some stuff. The 400 years, they're militant Jews. Now you got to think about it. They were in captivity, and then they made the return, and now we're going into the silence era. So there's lots of generations that this is going through, and so you can kind of see them getting things back together, and they're working together, and the families are kind of joining up again. And then this is where we see this. There are militant Jews who attempt to revolt against foreign rule, make Jerusalem and the surrounding area of Judea an independent country. These include the Maccabees and the Zealots, and they did have some success. I tell you what, we'll take a side note here. I got a little bit of time. Let me do this. I don't have a bunch of copies, but if you'd like to read it, I've got it here for you if you'd like it. This is really good, and it's a lot. It's 5 pages. I'm not just going to sit here and read it to you, so I'll try to skim it. After the death of Alexander the Great, the kingdom was divided. You had Egypt, the Seleucid Empire, never heard of that. The kingdom of Pergamon and the Macedon, including Greece. Egypt governed by Ptolemy the First, allowed for Judaism in Jerusalem, and they flourished even till the 3rd century BC. 2nd century BC, the Seleucids, having gained dominance over Judea, went and enforced dominion over Egypt and the Jews. I've never heard some of that, so it's ancient history, and it's interesting to see how the Jewish people come through that. And it's kind of like it was in the return. The leadership allowed them to return. Some of this leadership, you see, it's letting them come back. Then you have the Ptolemaic, I never heard of them. The theocracy and politics intertwined in 2nd century BC. The social structure of Jerusalem was run by the Jewish aristocracy, such as the priests and high priests. Although Hellenism, or the Grecian portion of it, was spread through 3rd century, and they were the dominant culture around Judea and the Greek way of life. So they were heavily influenced by the Greeks, but they still wanted to have the priesthood, and they still had that during that time. And this is one of the reasons I believe they went into a revolution, though, is because they tried to force them to make false sacrifices, or to make that abomination type sacrifice. The guy refused to do it, and he was the leader of the revolution. And he refused to do it, and another Jewish guy stood up to do it, and he killed him. And then that began the revolution, because they were trying to make false sacrifices. I was like, oh, that's pretty crazy. But that's what started it. I'll get to it in a second. The Holy Temple was the most important structure to the entire Jewish community. It still is today. That's one of the things that was most important to them back 2,000 years ago. It was a social and religious center, so it made a big thing, and the enemy knew it. They said, well, hey, we're going to defile that temple, and man, that just outraged them, and that's what started it up. Let's see, I'll try to get to that. I think it's on the next one. Yeah, here it is, rebellion. At the rebellion, let's see, Mattathias, it kind of reminds you of wasn't that the name of the other apostle that they voted in? Remember that? It kind of reminded me of that right when I saw it. There was a big meeting. The country priest was ordered to fulfill his duty to the state, be the first to sacrifice an animal to an altar of an idol. They were forcing them to do it to an offer of an idol. He refused, and when another Jewish man stepped forward to do it, he murdered them. And he says, Matthias preached. He said, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and stands by the covenant follow me." And they're taking this statement from actually I think that's the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha, right. But those books were not allowed into this canon in the Old Testament, New Testament. But historically, you have this guy, Mattathias, and then the Jewish people had their leader. He had 5 sons. This was around 167 BC, and they went against some of the Roman armies. They sent in a really weak Roman army against him at first, and they didn't realize how powerful he was with his army that he had gathered together. Well, the Romans were defeated the first batch that they sent. Then they got real mad and they sent 60,000 with a real big time general. And the Jewish people, and when you read it, you'll kind of see it. It was more like guerrilla warfare because they were attacking them like bits and pieces and almost completely destroyed him and 60,000. And then ultimately they did defeat them. They did ultimately defeat the Jews because all of them were dying off. You know, each one of them, they get killed in battle. And then you get down to, after all these battles and different things like that, and you get down to 165, December 25th, 165 BC, after months of work of clearing and cleaning. Well, let me back up. After the defeat of Antiochus, the armies were devastated. That was the big time general for the Roman people in 60,000, and there was only like 7,000 of them, and they were just picking them off as they go. And they finally got them, defeated them, met again with Judah's army, and that was one of the sons. The Seleucids were bereft of hope as Judah drove the enemy out of the holy city. The Jewish army had defeated Lysias. When Judah and his brothers went to the temple, he saw the destruction and defilement of Antiochus caused upon. Antiochus was that general, the Roman general. He caused upon it, was overwhelmed with grief, and then after months of work cleaning and clearing the temple, was finally rededicated to God. The celebrations continued for 8 days, and is known today as the celebration of Hanukkah. So it's like a celebration of them defeating the enemy. But we know not too long after that, the Roman Empire still gains control over Jerusalem, but it's like they've got their own, the Pharisees and Sadducees kind of have their rule in it, and they're kind of running things too, but ultimately they had the upper hand. It's a lot. I mean, it's really a lot of history in that, but if you guys are interested in reading that, I got it right there. All right. Now let's get back to our book here. On number 3 on page 94, you have the religious sects or the religious groups, 2 primary religious parties. And it kind of reminds you of the Republicans and Democrats after you read that. It's like both of them are just wanting to be in thing, but none of them getting anything done. That's kind of what, you know. There are 2 primary religious parties, and you have one that's all about the legalism. Both of them are doing it, but one of them's more than the other. The Pharisees were the Orthodox conservative group, and the Sadducees were the more liberal group. That sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny in a way. Not funny, ha-ha, but just kind of odd. But both of them together work together to use their wealth and influence to keep the political waters calm. And a ruling board called the Sanhedrin is made up of representatives for both parties. That sounds familiar, don't it? But the 2 groups have little in common except their desire for religious freedom. They wanted their freedom, but they wanted to control the people at the same time. And later we know that they wanted to kill Jesus and were successful because God allowed it, right? And so we see that group. That's the group that was running things. And you could see them, especially under Roman rule. The Romans like, hey, we don't want to deal with you people and stir, think about it. We don't want to stir them up too bad, because if we make them too mad, they're going to rebel against us like they did back in 165. Now that would be a reminder. Jewish people, untrained, going against Roman soldiers that are highly trained. I mean, think about it. That they got something that the Romans don't have. They're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for everything.
But that's the Lord.
The what?
They got the Lord.
Yeah, exactly. And so actually in that reminded me, in one of the statements in there, I think it was Judah, which was one of the sons, they were going into battle and they knew they weren't going to make it. And they cried out to God to give them victory, and God gave them the victory. And so I was like, man, God was still working, even though he wasn't using priests and prophets like he did in the other books, writing, doing all the writings and stuff. All right, now next, let's go to number 4. The Messianic hope and expectation of a Savior. So we leave off the Old Testament, and there's some prophecies in there about Jesus. So, and then they've got the Old Testament in their hands, or available to where they can get to it and read it, and they understand it, and they say, well, hey, we've got a Messiah that's coming, and that was their hope. And you could see them, especially as a savior to get them out of the clutches of the government and different things like that. But we know that's not what happened. He will come back to do that very soon, right? We know that according to Revelation, he'll come back and do that. But here, God had a different plan. He's going to come as the Savior first, and then come back as that ruler, as that King of Kings when he comes back again. All right, so look on number 4 there. He says, the Messiah or Savior is one who's prophesied through the Old Testament to save the Jews. Some feel they need, it says some feel they need spiritual salvation. Others are looking for political salvation. And we kind of see that in the Gospels. Some of them were looking for that one to rule and to govern, but some of them, they're like looking for salvation. We see that. For both reasons, the expectation and hope for the coming Messiah is strong during the 400 silent years. And that's kind of odd to see that for me, because I was like, well, it seemed like to me they wasn't really going after God if God was silent. So it's kind of, you kind of look at different things and say, man, that was just a time period that was probably very difficult. Because God wasn't using a prophet, but they did have the word, it's and then they're looking for the Messiah. But then you see all this rebellion, and like halfway through, you see this big rebellion against the government, and these governments are changing. It's just kind of, I'm sure it was nerve-wracking for them. All right, now, in the next couple pieces, in that number 4, just some side notes. This part of the world has a common language. We know that was the Greek language, and a common culture which facilitates the spread of the Messianic message. And this is one of the reasons they thought that all that was going to take place, because all of it was, everything was coming together. We kind of do that too. It was like, well, hey, all these things are coming together for the Lord to come back. We can't buy, sell, or trade unless you got this, and that's kind of coming together. And then you see all the earthquakes in different places and all the disease, all these things are happening, and the stage is set. So that's kind of what they're saying here. They were looking at, well, hey, he's fixing to be here. Well, they were right. He was fixing to be there. Now, the second one, the Roman Empire has brought the region military peace, extensive system of roads, sea travel, common government. The people can travel extensively without interference. The Jews, number 3, the Jews are suffering such religious persecution and political humiliation and widespread hope of expectation of a Savior. Yeah, they're wanting to come to straighten things out. We want that too. We want the Lord to come back and straighten things out. But in His time, we know it's in God's will. 400 years, they're like, thinking, wow, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? And it did happen. All right, so that's pretty much it until we get to, I wanted you to go to the map. Let's see. We pretty much know page 95. Let's go to D, that map, and you see, look at D. I want you to do this with me. Put a 1 next to Persia, okay? And then you see a 2 next to Greece. And then you see a 3 on the Rome, right? But remember where the Dead Sea is? See that little sliver right there? Like on the west side of Persia, that's the Dead Sea. And right above that, that's where Israel is, right? Y'all remember that?
Now what?
Right beside it, right there, right up beside it, okay.
The smallest little sliver you see there on the right of the map.
Yeah, the smallest
Just
sliver.
above Persia.
That's the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Okay.
So between it and that big body, which is the Mediterranean, is Jerusalem is up in there.
Right, and yeah, right to the left, that's Israel. And then, you know, we got the Sea of Galilee at the top of that little looking, it's kind of distorted from what it is like on page 26. Page 26 will help you. And then the one that looks like a straight line up with some finger looking things, that's Egypt and the Nile. Okay, go to page 26 and it's got it broke out pretty good.
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah, but now what he's wanting you to do here is to go, this is the silence area. You got Persian, then Grecian, and then Roman control right there. And then it's just the geographical movement of the silence area. So the power, the position of power is changing, but yet Israel is still the key player, right? Jerusalem, Israel, the people of Israel. All these years, they've been right in the middle. Even today, they're in the headlines, I mean, all the time about something. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for tonight. And then next week, we'll get into the poetical books. And anybody can name some of those?
Psalms.
Yep, Psalms.
Ecclesiastes, Psalms.
Oh yeah, y'all know them, okay. So we'll get into them. Some good books. That's some of my favorites. Maybe that's why I like them so much, because of the poetic books. All right, Brother Tom, you want to close for us?
Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come and worship you, Lord, and